people say to me, what will President Trump do? You say, look, Israel's our friend. Israel's our ally. Let them decide what they want to do. Let them come to me and explain to me why this is the best outcome, why this brings the most prosperity, the most security, the most human dignity for the most people. And I'm happy to look at it. I mean, I'm going to take it seriously. No American is going to be more of a Zionist than the Zionists, okay? It doesn't work that way. Nothing more important right now than locking back in that relationship between Israel and the United States, which has been damaged, over the last 4 years.
All right, well, the countdown is on. In 5 days, the people of the United States will have their last bite at the apple, of course, to vote because they've been voting since September. But all the same, that'll be the end of it. The polls are going to close in the evening, and they're going to start counting the numbers and see who the next president of the United States is going to be. Will it be Donald Trump or will it be Kamala Harris? And obviously for Israel, as for the United States itself, the determination of the American people is going to have a lot of impact on our lives going forward. And I figured that the best person to talk about it under the circumstances is Ambassador David Friedman, who served from 2017 to 2021 as the U.S. ambassador to Israel under President Trump in a momentous 4 years where we saw everything from moving the U.S. embassy to Israel to U.S. recognition of Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights to leaving the nuclear deal with Iran and on and on and on. It was an amazing 4 years, I must say. And so I'm pleased, but before I introduce you to or say hello to Ambassador Friedman, I just want to say that we have a dual purpose in this interview today. It's both to talk about the election on Tuesday and also to talk about Ambassador Friedman's new book, which talks about a new way of going forward with U.S. policy here in Israel that could be rather important if Trump is elected. And so without further ado, welcome Ambassador David Friedman to the Caroline Glick Show.
Thank you, Caroline. Always great to be with you.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. And this is the first time that I'm actually talking to you in the studio. We've done it on Zoom a couple of times.
Sure.
So this is his book, One Jewish State. And we're going to get to this in a second. Or actually, why don't we start with this now as we talk about the elections? Why you wrote this after October 7th?
Yep.
I'm not sure that it would be the first thought of a former ambassador. Okay, Israel is just fighting for its life. Let's talk about applying Israeli sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. So what was it that made you, on the other hand, it's very amazing because you're saying, okay, let's go for broke. Let's do the whole thing now, right? I mean,
yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about the thought process, because here in this book, you basically are calling for Israel to apply its sovereignty to Judea and Samaria.
Yeah, to all of Judea and Samaria.
Right.
Well, look, October 7th happened. We there have been months of podcasts and discussions about it. We know what happened, how horrible that was. Then the Palestinians, through multiple polls in Judea and Samaria, spoke and said, we like what happened. We support what happened, 80% or more. Even as recently as I think 2 weeks ago, Mahmoud Abbas gave this, eulogized with great praise Yahya Sinwar.
Right.
And then, the administration of the United States is saying, well, we have to have a two-state solution over and over and over again. Kamala Harris, Joe Biden is saying we have to have a two-state solution. And, that kind of put me over the edge because I would hope, look, as bad as October 7th was, repeating that over again, could be the end of Israel. So to me, I thought someone needed to step in and say, we have to not just, criticize the two-state solution, but, bury it deep in the ground, put the nail in the coffin and let it never go up again. Part of the book.
Put guards at the grave to make sure that there's no resurrection.
It can't be resurrected. So that was sort of part of the book. And then I said, well, look, you can't just say that because if you say nothing more, you create, a vacuum. Well, then what do we do? And, nobody really jumps into the fray. Vacuums don't do well in the Middle East, right? Lebanon, there was a vacuum created, Hezbollah, vacuum in Gaza, Hamas. Even ISIS filled a vacuum in Sinai. So what's the answer? And then, I look at it from, multiple perspectives and I conclude, look, whether whether you care about this region, and so many people do, whether you care about it from a perspective of faith, or you care about it from a perspective of national security or economics or geopolitics or regional, advance, whatever you do, however you process this and however you prioritize the issues. One Jewish state, Israeli sovereignty over all of Judea and Samaria, works for everyone. And I said, let's get this on the table now and start. It's not going to happen overnight, but let's start talking about it. Let's have a discussion about it. I think Israel has not had this discussion because it's so complicated and difficult, both domestically and internationally. It kind of gets kicked down the road. You can't kick it down the road anymore. You have to have this discussion.
I think that's really the thing about October 7th. It was a great moment of clarity. It says, okay, this is what you get when you get a Palestinian state, especially because the Palestinian Authority supported it and Fatah forces even were involved in it from Gaza. And so you look at that and you say, okay, this is what they want. Obviously, we're not going to be able to do this again anywhere else, including not in Gaza again, not in Judea and Samaria, nowhere. But what was interesting as well is that it induced for Israelis a crisis of faith, because we saw the faith in Israel's ability to protect the Jewish people was really kicked hard on that day. I mean, we had full communities that were totally overrun. I mean, they were under Hamas occupation, and we got a genocide. And so you had this shattering of faith in the army and in Israel. Like, can we really do this again? Can we keep this up? And so that you did something in this book that's new. I mean, I wrote a book calling for Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria 11 years ago. But what's different in your book specifically is, besides the international law and blah, 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 you talk a lot about the Bible. And you talk about bringing faith into foreign policy making in vis-a-vis the Middle East. And talk a little bit about that, because that seems to me to be the most novel aspect of your thesis, that we have to bring the Bible into how we deal with the Middle East. So,
well, look, it's the Bible speaks to many people. I think
only 1 billion or so. Right?
Yeah, I'm saying I looked at 2,000 copies of the Bible are sold every hour, right? Every year, 20 million Americans buy a new Bible, right? Most of them have one. They buy new ones. They give them to their kids. It speaks to people, and in the case of Israel, I mean, it speaks with a megaphone because it is essentially the title insurance policy of the Jewish people to the land of Israel.
As David Ben-Gurion said to the Peel Commission in 1937, he said, "My deed is the Bible." Not your book, but the Bible.
Right, and nobody else, no other people anywhere have that, right? So most borders around the world, especially in Europe, were just created by wars. They had wars. They stopped the wars. They drew a line. That was the border. There's no other place where you really have an ancient text that is accepted by billions of people that establishes the boundaries of the state of Israel, right? So it's significant, and it's significant both theologically and historically, because a lot of times people make decisions, based upon historical facts, and these historical facts are compelling. But I also think, it's also sort of the cherry on top, right? I mean, it's not the primary argument. The primary argument I make is, look, if you're, we've gotten rid of the Palestinian state intellectually, right? We said, okay, we can't do that. All right, now we got to collect resumes of who can be sovereign over this territory. Somebody's got to be sovereign, right? It can't just be no man's land. Well, who's around? Let's look at the resumes. Well, it's obviously not going to be Syria or Lebanon. It's not going to be the Palestinian Authority or Hamas or Islamic Jihad. It can't be Jordan. It can't be Egypt. They're failed states. Is there any non-failed state in the region? Yeah, there's one. There's Israel, right? It's got a GDP per capita around 15 times that of its neighbors. It's a democracy. And most importantly, this is, I think, one of the most important illustrations in the book, at least, and Israel doesn't get enough credit for this. Israel's population is 20% Arab. 20% of the citizens of Israel are Arab. More than 20% of the students at the elite universities in Israel are Arab.
Yeah, but one of the things that Israelis, when you talk about there's no real discussion about what to do with Judea and Samaria, that's because you always have the doorstopper is always demography, where they say, we don't want to naturalize the Arabs of Judea and Samaria. And, in my book, I pointed out that the demography really isn't that bad. It was based on a lie of the Palestinians. They put out the census data that increased their population artificially by 50%. So that was what started the whole demographic time bomb thing. But all the same, when you look at the data, 80% of them more or less think that October 7th was fantastic and they want us all dead.
Right.
So it to many people, it's not the demography, the argument about are we going to be a Jewish majority state or not. It's fine, we're a majority. But do we want to give the rights of citizenship, freedom of movement, they can come in and go to our major cities at will, to over 1 million people who want to burn our kids alive? And the answer that you come up with inevitably is absolutely not.
Right, of course. So you don't want to do that. People say, well, why should we absorb responsibility or accept responsibility for 1 billion or whatever the number is for the Palestinians living in Judea and Samaria? So my argument is twofold. My argument number is we have already, in a sense, right? I mean, we're there anyway.
Right.
When I used to meet with, the security, establishment leaders and saying, well, we don't want that responsibility. I said, wait a second, is Fauda kind of like a fake or is it real? Because what I understand is that you're there anyway under the worst circumstances, right, with guys who, are pretending to be Palestinians and risking their lives every single day. And you're going in, into the Kasbahs at, middle of the night. It's very dangerous. I mean, you're there. Don't tell me you're not there. So the question is, are you there? What tools will you have while you're there? And if you're there under circumstances where you can say, look, leaving aside freedom of movement and voting, but you're there under circumstances where you say, look, we got a few $1 billion in a trust that we're going to build roads and highways and hospitals, whatever. We're still going to kill the people that want to kill us first. I mean, we're not giving up our security operations there. In fact, you'll be sovereign, so you'll establish your own security operations without the Palestinian Authority getting in the way. But you'll also have the carrots, not just the sticks. And hopefully there'll come a time, I don't know if it's 5, 10 years, 20 years, where you begin to de-radicalize at least a portion of the population. People say, well, you can't because it's an ideology. Well, look, there aren't a lot of Nazis around today. There aren't a lot of imperialist Japanese around today, so you can over time. But meanwhile, if Israel is sovereign, it will have the maximalist control over the area for national security purposes. And then the cherry on top, right, which is the faith, right, which is this land was given to the Jewish people by God. Now, it means a lot to evangelical Christians. It means a lot to other Christians. It means a lot to some Jews in America. But here's who I think it means a lot to also, which we don't really think about. It means a lot to Israelis.
It means a lot to Israelis.
And I think that, that's the way, because my argument here is let's not get a right-wing government with 51 seats or 61 seats and ram this through. I think you need to make this case. This is determining the longest border of the state of Israel with finality. Okay, it's a big deal. And let's get the population thinking about it, talking about it. It's like never discussed, Get people talking about it in all corridors and all parlors. And I think, I've had this conversation with many secular Israelis. And I tell them, look, just think about it for a second. Think about a video of Palestinians marching into Shiloh, right, with pitchforks and tractors and destroying 3,500 years of archaeological history of the Jewish people. Shiloh was Jerusalem before there was Jerusalem. I mean, you okay with that? You okay with giving up our national DNA? I said, and what they tell me is, look, even those who say, look, I'm not even sure I believe in God. I'm not sure I even believe in the divinity of the Bible. I don't know who wrote it, but whoever wrote it, it's our book. However it arose, it's our book, it's our DNA, it's our history. It's why we're here today, and none of those ancient nations are anymore. So I think that there is a basis for the people of Israel. And I wish I could have written this book in Hebrew. It came out.
Well, it came out in Hebrew.
It came out in Hebrew, which I was very grateful for. It came out in Hebrew a month after it came out in English. I couldn't write it in Hebrew. My Hebrew's not good enough. But it's really the Israeli audience that has to go first. People say to me, "What will President Trump do?" And I say to him, look, if I went to President Trump, let's say he's elected and he's sitting there, and I go to him in a couple of weeks after the election, or he's sworn in, and I say, Mr. President, I wrote a book. I have an idea. I think this is the pathway to go. And he says, that's great, very interesting. I think it,
What do the Israelis say?
What do the Israelis want to do? He says, no American is going to be more of a Zionist than the Zionists, okay? It doesn't work that way. And the Israelis have to make this decision first in a way. And I think what he would say, in a longer conversation, he'd say, look, Israel's our friend. Israel's our ally. Let them decide what they want to do. Let them come to me and explain to me why this is the best outcome, why this brings the most prosperity, the most security, the most human dignity for the most people. And I'm happy to look at it. I'm going to take it seriously, but they have to go first.
It's interesting because we're going to get to the elections in the next question. But in this question, I look at it and I say, when Trump came out with the deal of the century, and you and I face the same frustrations, right? Because I, at least from my perspective, when I'm looking at the deal, they're talking about 30% goes under Israeli sovereignty, and then you have a 4-year period or a 5-year period where the Palestinians have to totally reform and become, they have to become nonviolent. They have to issue
Canadians, essentially.
I don't know, they're Canadian, but I mean, they got
Former Canadians.
Right, they got a lot of jihadis in Canada, unfortunately, these days. But yes, you do ostensibly this concept of a peace-loving people. You have to change your mindset, and if you do, then you can get, such and such amount of territory to make a Palestinian state. So it was obvious to me when I was arguing in favor of Israeli application of sovereignty to the 30%, that, okay, we're going to get the arrest. Like, you take a step forward,
right,
the whole thing is going to fall apart because it's all a lie. But there are two problems with that. One problem, and you talk about it in your book, is the fact that the faith communities, both in Israel and in the United States, the evangelicals didn't want to have anything to do with it. Mm-hmm. And they're looking at me like I'm some sort of, charter member of Peace Now for talking about it because, right, it has that word state in it, which you also were saying that you were forced to accept. So one problem is that the people that you would expect to be most supportive of it are like, we don't want to have anything to do with it. But the other problem is that it never really works the way that we think it is. Like, it's never that, that the two-state solution people say, okay, look, yeah, you're right. So 4 years passed and they still are jihadis and they still want to kill your kids. That's all true, but,
yep,
and so you don't actually, so the idea that everything will fall into place because it's obvious that they won't abide by any of the criterion that you're setting out, that they should stop being barbarian and supporting terrorism, it never matters because so speak to those two objections, and then we can.
Well, look, they're legitimate objections, and President Trump, raised the most significant of those two when we were talking with him. Mike Pompeo and I were making the case for the 30%, but he said, look, let's assume that the Palestinians don't rise to the occasion, which is a pretty fair assumption. Okay, so Israel then, grows into the rest of Area C. But you still have Oslo, right? You still have Area A and you still have Area B. And there's nothing in the plan where Israel ever gets a hold of Area A and Area B. So you're left with this, concentration of Palestinians in a landlocked territory, essentially without leadership or with terrible leadership. And his question to me is, well, aren't you sort of just building the next Gaza, in Judea and Samaria? And it's a good question. It's a fair point. So, and that's what this book addresses. I have a chapter called Unfinished Business. He asked that question. I said, well, that's a good question. How do we avoid creating Gaza on the West Bank? And that's what this is. Israel has to take it all. I mean, and then maybe, I understand the reluctance, but you either own it or you don't. I don't think there's any real way you can't split up this land. It's just not splittable. And so, and then the question is, well, it's a big lift. You have people there that want to kill us. My point is, well, they want to kill us either way. We might as well be there and address it. I'm not suggesting going light on the terrorists. You have some extra tools to de-radicalize, and it's an alternative to the two-state solution where Israel can say, look, we will ultimately assume responsibility for the health, the welfare, and the dignity of every Jew in Judea and Samaria and every Palestinian who doesn't want to kill us. Yeah, he wants to live with us in peace. I think that's a very compelling argument compared with any other opportunity and a choice. Now, again, it costs a lot of money to do this also. So we have to go south or east and start talking to the Emirates, and we have to talk to the Saudis. We got to get them off this idea that they want a two-state solution. My view has been over the last year, because you keep hearing it from the Saudis about a two-state solution, my view has been that, again, the Saudis can't be any less pro-Palestinian than the United States, right? I mean, this is their problem. I mean, America keeps pushing for a two-state solution. What are the Saudis going to say? You guys are too pro-Palestinian? They can't do that. So got to change the administration, got to rejigger this thing, and we got to make the case to the Saudis, to the Emiratis, to the world, that if you care about the Palestinians, okay, you really care about them, you want them to be safe and secure with human rights, human dignity, and freedom of religion, Israel's got to be in charge. And I think that argument, frankly, sells itself, but no one's making it right now.
You could be right. I mean, there's also the Islamic aspect to it, which is that they don't accept the legitimacy of a non-Islamic entity in an area that was once controlled by Islamic leaders. So, there's a question of how, we want to bring maybe faith into our policy making, but in order to do that, you have to reach some sort of meeting of the faith. And that was the concept of the Abraham Accords. But at the end of the day, the fact that the UAE conditioned them on Israel not implementing its sovereignty over parts of Judea and Samaria seems to speak, and then the Saudi obsession with Palestinian statehood seems to speak to the absence of a real coming to terms of the faith, of the return of the children of Isaac and Jacob.
Well, look, I can't speak to the Saudis. I haven't had a discussion with them in 4 years. With the Emiratis, nothing in the Abraham Accords that they signed says anything about a Palestinian state other than a 4-year suspension of
the sovereignty.
Of the sovereignty, and those 4 years have expired.
Right.
And the Abraham Accords are still intact through the most stressful period between Israelis and Arabs that I've known since I'm alive. So they're still holding. So look, we got to work. We can work on it. I mean, look, I'm optimistic. I obviously can't speak for what the Saudis will say or the Emiratis, but common sense tells me that everybody cares about one thing. They care about the moderates winning over the extremists. That's really what they care about. And if we can package this in a way in which it's a view for moderate Arabs, moderate Palestinians, assuming that they rise up. And by the way, look, we're working on that as well. We're working on identifying who among the Palestinian community will go with this. And just to put this in context, no one's asking the Palestinians to get up and say, we hereby renounce our dream to statehood. Okay, it's unnecessary. What we really got to know is someone to say, look, it's a very complicated issue, but if you're telling me that I'm living with better policing and better security and better schools, you're going to build me some roads and you find a way for me to sell goods, with an outlet to Europe, and you're going to, I'm not going to give up all my aspirations, but I'm also not going to complain. And that's about as good as we'll get, but that's not bad.
No, it's not. So let's talk a little bit, because obviously next Tuesday you're going to have your election day.
Yep.
And I mean, it can go either way. And, people say it's the most fateful election in U.S. history. I agree. I guess, do you agree?
I do.
Why? Why do you think that they're the most fateful?
Well, listen, because the policies of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are diverging in ways that, we haven't seen before. If you go back and you look at the difference between, George W. Bush and Bill Clinton, there are differences, but they're not out here, they're here. I mean, now the differences are stark, dramatic. And, very much when it comes to Israel, the issues are dramatic. I mean, look, you'll have a president who will pick either, the Blinkens and the Sullivans of the world to be her staff, or worse, for Israel. And you see who's in the staffing right now. As we both said many times, personnel is policy, and the personnel right now is really, really hostile to Israel, right. And it's going to get worse. In contrast,
and her senior advisors on the Middle East are horrible.
Horrible. You compare that to the Trump team, and I don't know who it'll be, but I know among whom it'll be. These are all people who really understand not only who love Israel and understand its geopolitical importance and strategic importance to the United States, as well as the fact that it speaks to many people in many ways, including faith. So for Israel, it'll be a big difference. Now, it's not just that; it's a question of what does America look like, because one of the most important factors that drive Israel's safety and security is whether America, is safe, secure, and most importantly, strong. Look, Biden and Harris, they caused everything here. Everything is a function of the policy on Iran. We left office, and I think Iran had a GDP of under $200 billion. And Soleimani had been killed, and the intel was that they were nervous, and now the GDP is over $400 billion, more than doubled. And they're not afraid of America, and they know they hear and they know, and I'm sure they're spying on us as well. And I'm sure they've got leaks inside the government right now. So I mean, they know that the most that America will do to arrest their malign activity is to put some THAAD installations up in Israel and stop the incoming. But that's not a threat to them. Yep. It's like playing a game where the worst you'll do is a tie. It's just not enough. And so the absence of deterrence, and when the United States of America, with $1 trillion military budget, reserve currency of the world, the largest economy in the world, when they don't, when they don't leverage that to deter our enemies, it's a massively dangerous and it's also a huge waste of opportunity. Trump instinctively gets that. He instinctively understands, okay, this is what I got, this is what they got. They need me more than I need them. They're afraid of me more than I'm afraid of them. How do I leverage that to make the world a more peaceful place? Yeah, that's his approach. It's instinctive and it's obviously correct. They look at everything differently. The reason the Abraham Accords have stagnated over the last 4 years is because America has moved away from Israel and closer to Iran. Okay, that's exactly the wrong thing to do to expand the Abraham Accords. They keep talking about, well, we want to expand the Abraham Accords. Well, you ain't going to do it if you move towards Iran and away from Israel. It was the lack of daylight. It was the rock-solid relationship between America and Israel that caused the Abraham Accords to develop in the first place.
One of the things that about Iran, and obviously I agree with you, but J.D. Vance said, I think last week, that the United States and Israel have disparate interests on Iran, that the United States does not want to be in war against Iran. I mean, you could argue with him and say, well, sorry, but Iran has been at war against the United States since it declared war on the United States in 1979, and there's never been a dull moment since.
Yeah.
But that's not how a lot of people see things. They think, I was listening to, I don't know, I think a podcast or a speech by Neil Ferguson the other day, today, actually, on my way into Jerusalem. And he was just talking about that a Cold War is a latent world war, basically. And he said, that's how he put it. And he was talking about how really, when you look at all of these fronts, whether it's China, Taiwan, North Korea, Japan, where they just shot an ICBM, of course, yesterday, but and the Middle East, what you're looking at are fronts that are not deterred, that they could be hot or not, and it's really just a question that has to be answered almost at every moment. Yeah. That everything is just on edge. But the latency of the war, the hot war, is always there. They'll attack you again, and you'll be on the receiving end. And the question isn't really, are you at war with Iran? It's, what do you want to do about the fact that Iran is at war with you? Mm-hmm. And here you see that there is a disparity. In Israel's case, particularly after October 7th, there's a consensus that we need to take care of business now.
Yep.
And if we don't, we're never going to get a better chance. And it could be very well too late. It looks like a threshold nuclear power now. So how do you bridge the difference when, you're hearing, and Trump himself said, I think the day before yesterday, that he expects that Israel, if he's elected, he wants Israel to finish the war before he's inaugurated. Well, these are statements that seem not to adhere to the idea that he's going to say, okay, what do you want? He's saying, this is what we want, and it's not the same as what you want.
Well, look, it's a small world, and all these issues affect the United States as well as Israel, and their interests. I think their interests are, if they're not aligned 100%, they're aligned, more than enough to be on the same page. Look, I think when people talk about wars in America, I think what Trump is speaking about, what Vance is speaking about, are these kinds of. I think he's talking about what you see between Russia and Ukraine, where
Maybe he's talking about invading Iran the way that the United States invaded Iraq. Yeah, the concept of a war is based on that experience.
There's no. I think there's no appetite in the United States right now for American troops on the ground in the Middle East. Just zero appetite. Right. So I think that's known to everybody. I wouldn't expect any American president to be pushing that. But I think Iran is a little bit different. Look, Iran has a population that's not on side with the mullahs largely. They're looking for something. I think, we know that he's willing to act kinetically against Iran. We saw that with Qasem Soleimani. I don't think he would in any way interfere if Israel wanted to act kinetically with regard to Iran. I also don't think that he would be unreceptive to being to considering a partnership, because at the end of the day, I really do think that if the decision is made that Iran is going to be a nuclear power, and you're right, it's very close already, and you can't bankrupt them into changing course, which he's going to try first. I assume the first thing that happens on day one is a restoration of sanctions that brings them back to the brink of bankruptcy, and that's regrettably that just went away into the ether over the last 3 years. But then if it looks like they're going towards a nuclear weapon, and I think he completely gets it that they can't,
right?
Then I think we'll see a partnership between Israel and the United States and maybe hopefully some other well-meaning countries about how to stop that. I think it needs to be a partnership. I think Israel will act alone if it has to. But I doubt it'll have to. I really do. But again, I think nobody wants to get up and say, look, we're going to war against Iran. I mean, it's just something which is politically and diplomatically very much not in vogue right now. But what I would say is, the easy thing is you bring them to the verge of bankruptcy, you make them choose between a nuke and an economy, and they're going to have 30, 40 million people that are going to urge them to go, to put bread on the shelves rather than building it. We'll see where that goes. Khamenei's about to die, right? We don't know where that's going to. I mean, I'm not optimistic about where that leads, but there's a lot of stuff going on, And but the one thing that I don't know the answer to, maybe you do, is how effective Israel is acting alone. Whether they have what they need, whether they have all the,
I mean, that's really the question, because I like the economic thing. Everybody does. It's much better to think you can starve them out than actually have to fight them. But the problem is that they are very close. And there's another problem, which is, their ring of fire strategy is flunked. They failed, right? They don't. Hezbollah is dying for a ceasefire. I hope we destroy more of them before we accept anything like that, because nobody else is going to enforce a ceasefire. But Hamas is waiting to see what happens. But Iran, without them, we went in, we attacked them in 3 waves over 3 hours, and neither Hezbollah nor Hamas did a thing to try to interfere, which means that their strategy is dead. And so if their strategy of using terrorists to assault Israel is now beyond repair, at least for the foreseeable future, then probably their impetus to use nuclear weapons as a first option is increased, because they don't have the other options at their disposal the way that they did a year ago. So, I mean, I think the problem here is one of time. We'll have to see. But right now, I mean, let me just ask you a different question about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. So for the past year, we've been facing a situation where we are dependent on the United States while we're facing a hostile America. And we may be on steroids on November 6th if she wins. So the real question is, how would you advise? First of all, do you think that Israel can win under these circumstances? Do you think that there's a way to kind of square the circle of our dependence on the United States or current dependence? There are plans. There are, in fact, actions being taken to diminish that significantly, but it'll take a couple of years in order to develop the industrial capacity we need to replace American hardware. So. And it's being done. I mean, it's not something, but right now, today, when we're in a 7-front war that Iran is waging against us, can we win this with an America that doesn't want us to win it?
I think it's going to be very challenging. I think that, as you point out, Israel's years away from being independent with ammo, with the type of ammo that it needs, with the technology that it needs, with the spare parts that it needs on its airplanes. I mean, there's a lot. The partnership between the militaries of America and Israel is so deep, it's so strong, but the military, is bound by the political echelons, right. And so there are limits, and it's very, and this is one of the main reasons why I'm so hopeful that President Trump wins. He's not going to hold Israel back, on this critical issue. He totally gets the importance of depriving Iran of a nuclear weapon. I think it's, and I think, by the way, when he gets into office and he starts to really think about the last year, I think what he'll find is that Israel has been really defending the entire world against terror regimes. I mean, they're all shooting, the Houthis are shooting at Americans, and Hezbollah has, lots of tentacles out there that can threaten America, and so can Iran. So Israel has really been fighting the world's war, as Biden sits in a basement and Harris campaigns, on a bunch of platitudes. He gets that. He totally gets that. I can tell you, look, I was with him a couple of days after the beeper, to say he was impressed is really an understatement. I mean, he was completely taken by the creativity and the ingenuity and the tactical and technical expertise to do this. He understands how important Israel is an ally. He totally does. And he also wants us to avoid wars wherever he can. And, I think that circle can be squared, because wanting to avoid wars is not the same thing as saying I'm going to fight back 10 times harder if I have to. And I think both of those things can be true.
I think that what we've seen is that calls for de-escalation, which we're hearing, are actually a call that is contrary to deterrence. If you want to de-escalate, then by definition, you're not deterring anybody. You're saying, I want to de-escalate, so there's no deterrence. And so, a call for ending the war quickly is a call for de-escalation. And I think, that contradiction has to...
Right. Well, look, first of all, I have no idea whether he said any of those things or not. I mean, this was reported in kind of a third-rate, if you will, publication. This wasn't, four sources from the, from the Wall Street Journal.
What was the report for? It was like Axios or Times of Israel, or
I thought it was Times of Israel. I mean, I don't think I'm not saying what was said. I don't know what was said. I wasn't in the room, but I'm not going to assume that that's true. Look, if he had said that 6 months ago, I would think that would be more problematic. Israel's saying right now that they, is that they've all but, defeated Hamas, and they've all but degraded Hezbollah. Hezbollah is down to 20% of its capacity. Its leadership is gone. I'm not saying they're not threatening. I think they still are very threatening. People, unfortunately, I think there were some casualties today. But it's different. It's different to say today, okay, start thinking about how to, wrap this up in a way where Israel's safe. If Israel can't wrap it up in a way where it's safe, it won't do it. And I don't think Trump would have any qualms about Israel.
I think the difference really, when you think about it, or one of the major differences, is whether you have somebody to talk about things with in a rational way. Because if you're in a world like the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden administration, where every conversation ends with two-state solution and don't cause any strategic damage to Iran,
or just don't, right?
Or don't, but it's
right.
Don't direct it always at Israel,
right.
And Iran manifestly doesn't care.
Right.
That's one thing. Then you're in a world where your ability to discuss things is limited. Whereas if you're in a situation where you say Israel has to finish the job, that's what the Americans are saying, not Israel. I think that you're in a different place.
Well, look, I could this I know because I was there. For 4 years, Israel faced a lot of challenges, nothing like October 7th, but faced lots of challenges. There were flare-ups in Gaza. Hezbollah was growing its PGM artillery. We would sit. I mean, it was really kind of one of my favorite parts of my job. We'd sit around with experts on both sides, with the president's endorsement, and just talk about how do we work this out? How do we make the world safer? How do we protect Israel? How do we protect America? It was really a team effort, and nobody had any pride of authorship, and no one gave anybody directions. It was just, how do we make this work? And
it was an alliance.
It was an alliance, very much a partnership, and a very cordial partnership. And so that's, I think, what we can expect. And under those circumstances, you almost always get to a good outcome.
You're going back to the United States tonight?
Yep.
And are you going to be at Mar-a-Lago, you think, on Tuesday?
Well, I haven't gotten the invitation yet, so we'll see. First, I got to go vote on Tuesday.
You haven't voted yet?
Can you believe it? I haven't voted yet. I have to vote on the 5th in Florida, which I'll do with great pride. And then we'll see where, if anywhere, I'm invited. I get very, I like to watch these things that I care about. I like to watch them, frankly, on my own. I mean, it's kind of, it's like watching a football game that I care about, or so a sporting. I just want to be with my own thoughts and be able to get up and sit down and scream and yell. I mean, I like that, but we'll see. I mean, to go to a launch party with 2,000 people, which I was invited to nearby, that doesn't really excite me too much. I'd rather just, I care enough about it that I don't want to be distracted by people eating.
It's very scary.
Yeah. It's really scary. It's very important to me. I want to just kind of be there and watch it on my own.
It's very scary. Do you think we'll have the results on November 6th?
We could have them theoretically. I don't want to, give an ayin hara, but, look, I believe, just my own assessment of the math is that if he wins Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania, I think it's over. in all three cases, the polls closed by 7 or 7:30 Eastern time, right? So that gives plenty of time to count and to get to a result. Now, obviously, if those are tight and they can't be called, then I don't know how long it'll take. I mean, it's really good for the country as well as for President Trump, because that it's called that night, which has always been, my history has always been, with the exception of Bush Gore, that's when it was always called at night. Gives people a much better sense of fairness and less opportunity for mischief. So I think it would be good for the country if we can call it that night. And most of these East Coast states, they close early and they're on the East Coast, and it's not impossible. But I don't know what they're doing to, I don't know what the logistics are for counting these votes.
Well, that's going to be all important. It's always important how you vote, but it's also important who counts your votes.
Unfortunately, yes.
We'll have to see what happens. And you think that there's a chance that you're going to be back here in Jerusalem next as Ambassador?
You know what? I don't know. I mean, it's up to him. Obviously, I don't have any say in this. I told him
the Israeli people can vote. We'd be voting overwhelmingly for yes,
and that's greatly appreciated. But that's not determinative. Look, if he wants me to do it, I'll do it. If he wants me to do something else, I'll do that. If he wants me to do nothing, I'll be disappointed, but I'll accept that as well. It's up to him. And but we have a good relationship. I think he's proud of what I did and endorses what I did and trusts me. And I'm certainly loyal to him like few others. And so I hope that I have the opportunity, because there's nothing more important right now than locking back in that relationship between Israel and the United States, which has been damaged, over the last 4 years.
Yeah, it sure has. Well, listen, good luck to all of us on Tuesday. Good luck to Israel. Good luck to the United States. We're all praying. And
yeah, nothing wrong with praying. I mean, pray. That's what I'm doing. That's all I can do.
And if we get if we get a certain outcome, then we may end up getting to this outcome, which
well, I think it's the best outcome.
Look, I wrote it was the best outcome 11 years ago, and even if we have to swallow them whole, So
I think it's the best outcome for everyone, and that was my point. Is it needs to be to get America to support it. We have to make the case it's a win-win for everybody in the region, and I think this is. And so we'll work on that, but we can't work on it until we have the right people in place.
You can't work on it when every conversation ends with you need a Palestinian state.
You certainly can't.
All right. Well, listen, David, I appreciate it very much, Mr. Ambassador. And we'll hope to see you soon on the other side of these elections and talk about all the wonderful things that we can do.
I'm sure we will. Thanks, Caroline. Great to be with you.
Take care.